Welcome to the Balanced Scorecard. This is a four-part series on the Balanced Scorecard. Balanced Scorecard has been around for many years, but we're going to look at it in the context of COVID. We're going to look at it in the context of a strategy map, and we're going to look at it in the case of a Best Buy and their turnaround from 2012 through 2017. And finally, we're going to look at innovation through the eyes of the Drucker Institute and what they rated as the most effective companies in the United States. And we're going to be looking at the balanced scorecard in the context of innovation. The full impact of the coronavirus is really only beginning to be understood today. And up until this point, we've been talking about changes in e-commerce, streaming media, online food delivery, online education, cloud companies, and so forth. So the real changes are going to be broader and deeper than what we fully understand today. And we're going to talk a little bit about what some of those changes are based on the observations of professors from the Harvard School of Business. So we're going to explore what it really means, and the real answer is going to be that the full recovery will not be felt until the American consumer is ready to go full bore into the new environment. We're going to look at a handful of observations from the Harvard School of Business about the impact of COVID on the business communities. Michael Beer talked about how organizations will have to develop trust-based cultures with their employees. That means that the rank and file, the middle management group of the employees will have to have honest and open conversations with the management of those organizations most impacted by COVID. Ryan Buell talked about how businesses will have to help customers be more helpful. What does that mean? Some examples are, for example, when you go to a movie, 2 minutes before the movie starts, the screen will ask you to turn off your cell phones so you have a better outcome and a better consumer experience in the movie theater. That's an example of how businesses will help consumers have a better outcome. Raj Chowdhury talked about the need for remote work to become more strategic. That includes both asynchronous and synchronous tools. So you can go anywhere in the organization to be able to communicate with the rest of the organization. Amy Edmondson talked about how leadership will engage people to work together more creatively. That means that the organization will have to create teams on a remote basis, and they're going to have to work as a team on a continuing basis in remote locations. Joseph Fuller talked about the likelihood of more standard operating practices will be elevated to another level as to create more financial flexibility. His example was in 2008, 2009, many companies reduced full-time employment to be replaced by contract employees to give the companies more financial flexibility. Stephen Kaufman talked about the need to have the supply chain managers to go deeper into the supply chain, maybe down to the third, fourth, even fifth, sixth, seventh levels, to really fully understand where all of the items are coming from in the supply chain. Many companies have discovered that they are more reliant on China than they fully realized, and that will probably make many companies uncomfortable on a go-forward basis. Elizabeth Moss Cantor described how the best leaders will break out of silos to solve some of their workplace problems. What does that mean? It means that you can get access to more resources if you break out of your silos and problem solve some of the challenges you have as a result of the pandemic. John McCumber talked about how the workplace will become healthier, and that'll become as a result of everything from heat sensors from the time you walk into the building to more filtration systems to a variety of other changes to make the workplace a healthier place to be. Gary Pisano talked about how in-person meetings will become less important in the future. Willie Shee talked about how the supply chain strategy will be rewritten. Many companies now are more dependent on China than they fully understood and realized, and To gain more strategic flexibility, they will be looking for other sources in the supply chain. We're going to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID on the vision statement, the strategy statement, and the balanced scorecard. We're going to use Delta Airlines as an example. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but we are going to give you some illustrations about the impact of COVID on organizations. The passenger traffic in 2020 will be at least 20% lower for Delta than it was in 2019. 2019, Delta had 1,300 aircraft in its fleet, and that's including both regional and domestic and international aircraft. That number of aircraft will not be needed on a go-forward basis. It is highly likely that air traffic or the passenger traffic will be down in 2020, 2021, 2022. So the vision statement will have to be rewritten to reflect the new reality of the pandemic at Delta. The strategy statement will have to be modified. For example, if Delta decides that the domestic air travel will recover more rapidly than international travel, that will require more narrow-body jets. If international travel recovers faster, that's going to require more wide-body jets. This is all going to roll over to the balanced scorecard, including the financial results, the customer targets satisfaction, the internal operations of Delta, and the employee and growth perspective training within Delta. COVID will have a dramatic impact on Delta Airlines. As another example of a vision statement, we're going to look at Best Buy's 2012 vision statement as part of Hubert Jolie's turnaround plan for Best Buy in 2012. As he met with the financial analyst, he described Best Buy as to be the specialty retailer who is the preferred authority and destination for technology, products, services, and solution. We're going to look at Best Buy in more detail in video 3 and look at their turnaround plan and map that turnaround plan to the balanced scorecard. We just gave you a simple example of Best Buy's vision statement in 2012. So this is where we were at. And now we're going to move into the strategy discussion before we get into the balanced scorecard, which is really the last 4 blocks on this diagram. The concept of what a strategy is really very simple. It describes how an organization can create value for its customers while differentiating themselves from the competition. The differentiation, or how an organization separates itself from the competition, is really the key to what a strategy is. There are 2 basic business strategies. The first differentiation is product differentiation. Examples include BMW, Mercedes, Lexus, and these are examples of high-end automobiles, but they are products or services superior and unique relative to its competition. And the consumers, their customers, are willing to pay more for those products. The alternative to product differentiation is cost leadership. Lower costs or productivity efficiency, elimination of waste, and tight cost control. Other things can be done, for example, is to reduce the number of SKUs, stock keeping units, and inventory. And other ways, having large numbers of stores and similar configurations. There's many ways to maintain your cost leadership. Best Buy is in this category, and we're going to look at how Best Buy worked very hard on keeping their costs low during the recovery period from 2012 through 2017. In 2012, when Hubert Joly outlined the Renew Blue plan, he talked about cost control and cost leadership. Let's take a look at what he was talking about. He was talking about efficiency, which included cutting unproductive costs, administrative and non-product expenses. So Hubert Joly was very focused on controlling costs during the turnaround period from 2012 through 2017. So now we're going to shift our attention to the balanced scorecard. The balanced scorecard really includes all four parts, all four layers, including financial, customer, internal, and growth. So now we're going to take a closer look at a model of the balanced scorecard. This is an illustration in the cost accounting text, Horngren's Cost Accounting, published by Pearson Education, the 2018 edition. And the four layers are illustrated for Chipset, the semiconductor company. And let's take a look at what the layers are. We've already talked about these: the financial perspective, the customer perspective, the internal business process perspective, the learning and growth perspective. And the chipset model, as it should have internal measures, and some of those measures are including external measures as well, initiatives, target performance, and actual performance. So now when you're looking at the balanced scorecard, you're not only just looking at the financial perspective, but now you're looking at the customer perspective as well as the internal business process perspective. And finally, the learning and growth perspective. For each one of these layers, you have identified measures, initiatives, target performance, and actual performance. And what's very important about the balanced scorecard is that everything flows from the bottom and moves upward to the top layer. Let's summarize a few points about the balanced scorecard and why it's more relevant today than ever before. It's a top-down reflection of the company's mission and strategy. So as companies have to make change in the COVID pandemic era, they have to build a mission and strategy around the new environment. So they have to lead the company, and the balanced scorecard becomes a very important cause and effect statement about where the company is going in the future. One very important role of the balanced scorecard is to communicate the strategy to all members of the organization by translating the strategy into a coherent set of understandable and measurable operational targets. Best Buy today has over 125,000 employees. To be able to communicate that strategy is extremely important, because without a clear, cohesive set of understandable and measurable targets, the employees will be having difficulty trying to understand what their role is in the organization. One very significant weakness of the financial statements is that it looks in arrears. It does not look forward. So one very important point about the balanced scorecard is that it is forward-looking, not the traditional format of always looking in the rearview mirror. One thing the balanced scorecard will do is to highlight less than optimal trade-offs that managers may make when they fail to consider operational and financial decisions together. What's an example of this? Well, if Best Buy offered one-day product delivery for all of its products, it could have serious financial implications to the operations of Best Buy. One thing that's very important about the balanced scorecard is that it helps you focus by emphasizing only critical success factors. We're going to look at the chipset model again here in a minute. And when you walk through the chipset model, you're going to be maybe surprised about how few it measures that are really included in the balanced scorecard, but it really helps the organization focus on critical success factors. One thing that's very important about the balanced scorecard is it helps you visualize a cause and effect strategy map, and that describes how an organization creates value. This page is a very busy page, but let's walk through it because it says a lot and it lays the groundwork for the next part of our discussion. So let's take a look at the 4 layers of the balanced scorecard. There is a strategy map outlining the 4 layers. And you can see there's the first layer. There's the second layer. There is the third layer. And there is the bottom layer, or the learning and growth perspective layer. So those are the 4 layers of the strategy map. And we walked through the 4 layers, previous discussions, and now we put it into a cause and effect relationship map. And that will help us identify how all these things fit together. And we're going to now walk through the next video, it's video 2. We're going to break apart what the strategy map and how it's built and the relationships among these various activities. Let's wrap up the discussion on the coronavirus and the balanced scorecard. The point of all this was to talk about how it's going to impact the various layers of the balanced scorecard. So let's go through and let's look at a handful of these. We're not going to go through them all. Trust-based cultures. Are trust-based cultures important in an enterprise? The answer is yes. And we can talk about trust-based cultures being important within the internal business process perspective, as well as a learning and growth perspective. And let's talk about how to make customers more helpful to get a better outcome. That would impact the customer perspective, as well as the internal business process perspective, and it could conceivably impact the learning and growth perspective. So when we walk through each of these items, you can see the multiple layers of the balanced scorecard are impacted by the coronavirus and the lasting changes to businesses. We are wrapping up our discussion on the balanced scorecard, and the next topic is going to be strategy maps. So let's build a point of transition here to video number 2. So we're going to be talking about focal points, we're going to be talking about trigger points, and we're going to be talking about points of differentiation, competitive points of differentiation, and we're going to be talking about the strengths of lines, strength of the relationship between the various nodes in the strategy map. Here we have a moderate line, here we have a very heavy line, and here we have a dotted line. So these are some of the things we're going to be talking about in the strategy map, and that'll lay the groundwork for video number 3 and video number 4.